Hey everyone, and thanks for jumping back into the cryptoverse. Today we're going to talk about Ethereum and discuss whether a $10,000 Ethereum is theoretically possible this market cycle. We're going to be doing so by looking at the market cycle ROI. If you guys like the content, make sure you subscribe to the channel. Let's go for 150,000 subscribers. Thank you guys for subscribing. Give the video a thumbs up. Also check out the Telegram channel, which you can find a link to in the description below. Let's go ahead and jump in. So the reason we look at Bitcoin and Ethereum market cycle ROI is because it allows us to get an idea of what is theoretically possible, even if we assume there's some level of diminishing returns. Now, if you look at this first cycle for Ethereum and measure the ROI from market cycle bottom, way over here, you can see that Ethereum, in fact, went up a modest 3 to 4,000x. This is a pretty substantial move from the market cycle bottom. And this is why so many people made a lot of money on Ethereum during the last market cycle. It's that holding it for a really long period of time ultimately yielded a ton of money. I mean, $1,000 investment in Ethereum the end of 2015 could have resulted in millions by early 2018. So we want to break this down and look at the current market cycle and see where are we currently in the current market cycle and how does it compare with the last market cycle. If we do this, we can look at the current market cycle and say, well, so far it is obviously not putting in nearly the same numbers. However, we could do a little bit of manipulation on where we measure the bottom from. Maybe it's not the technical bottom, but say the March bottom, and get something that looks a little bit more reasonable. The first thing that we'll do is we want to break this up into sub-market cycle ROI, because if the last cycle is any indication as to how this cycle will go, it could be representative of major moves up, followed by months of cooldown periods, and then followed by another major move up, and then cooldowns for a while, and then major moves up. So it's these subcycles we really want to break down and compare it as well to how Ethereum's performing today. So this first move will break into one subcycle, and we can see that first move from early 2016 or so into 2015 through early 2016, Ethereum went up a modest 50x or so before cooling off and laying low for a little while. And remember, this is a logarithmic scale. The second one, if we assume that starting from this new bottom over here is the second sub-market cycle ROI, we can see that it ultimately put in from its local bottom, not the market cycle bottom, but its sub-market cycle bottom, it ultimately put in a 200x. So these are pretty substantial moves. So it was about a 50x, followed by a cooldown phase, followed by a 200x. Now you could argue this is another cooldown phase, and we'll also break down that in a little bit. Now, looking at the current cycle, we can see that while it moved up for a while, but then ultimately it stayed in accumulation as measured from market cycle bottom. However, we could contend that, well, what if we just shift the market cycle bottom to March of 2020 rather than December of 2018, and just say that year and a half in between was more or less an accumulation phase and not really something we were immediately rebounding from like it was at the end of 2015. So if we break it down like that, we get something that looks a little bit more reasonable and something that we may expect, right? A fairly decent ROI from what we're now calling a shifted market cycle bottom, but as we would expect, diminishing returns. So far, we've seen essentially a 20x followed by a recent downturn. Now, this is measured on daily data. If we actually went to hourly data, it would be up higher than this because we know it rebounded significantly from the hourly low before we got the daily close. But the idea here is that we are putting in decent returns, and it's taking a little bit longer to do it. It's not scaling quite as quickly in terms of the ROI. So that ultimately leaves us, well, how do we get to a $10,000 Ethereum? Well, if you look back at the first market cycle, and we actually now shift our current market cycle ROI as measured from March, you can actually see that we're doing fairly well. The last cycle peaked early on, and then we had even another peak later, and then it cooled down for a while. This one is a more methodical move up. We have not had as crazy as a move. It might be hard for people to imagine because we have moved up from $100 to $2,000 before a slight retracement now back to $1,500 to $1,600. We made that move in only 11 months, And despite the fact that it moved up 20x in 11 months, it still pales in comparison to how quickly it moved up last cycle before cooling off for a while. So if we go back and say split this one up into one cycle, and then this one up into a second cycle, and then we also split this one up into a third subcycle, we get something that looks like this. So we had a 50x followed by a 60x or so, followed by a 9x. So these are all periods where you could argue that we had accumulation and a major move, and then accumulation and a major move, and accumulation and a major move. So far, we've just had a slow, methodical move up. Now, if we plot over our current subcycle market, or our current market cycle ROI from our shifted cycle bottom, we're already approaching a 20x with a slight retracement. Now, can we get to a $10,000 Ethereum this market cycle? Well, I think one thing we should consider is the fact that this market cycle could be broken down into several sub-cycles, just like the last cycle was. It could be that we have a major move followed by several months of a cool down period. And so imagine we go to 3K. Let's imagine that Ethereum goes to 3K and then cools down for 3 to 6 months or something like that. Now, obviously, we don't know if it's going to go to 3K before a cooldown period. 2K could be the local top before we get into a cooldown period. However, let's just assume we go to 3K and then we see a nice retracement, and then ultimately we have another sub-cycle for the price of Ethereum where it consolidates for a few months. People accumulate, and then we go on another major run, say later in the year or something like that. Well, imagine we first go to 3K and then we maybe retrace back down. Let's say we retrace back to $1,000 or something, or $1,500, and then we do another subcycle ROI of 10x. In that situation, it's not hard to imagine us getting to a $10,000 Ethereum this market cycle just by breaking down our market cycle ROI and looking at sub-market cycle ROI of the price of Ethereum. The last cycle actually had 3 of these major moves that ranged from a 9x up to a 50 to 60x. We could only have 2 of these major moves for the duration of this market cycle and still make it to a $10,000 Ethereum. Now, if we make it to a $10,000 Ethereum, then it implies we have a $100,000 to $200,000 Bitcoin at the very least. But of course, I think that's theoretically possible as well. Of course, it's going to take us some time. So I think when it comes to Ethereum, I would say there's a decent chance we're going to have several sub-cycles where, after accumulating for a while and cooling off, where they're going to go on another major run. And it's the accumulation of these separate runs that Ethereum has that I think should help get it to a $10,000 Ethereum this market cycle. So yes, I do think Ethereum can make it to $10,000. It might be plus or minus a few K around that, right? What's a few K among friends? But ultimately speaking, I do think it's theoretically possible. And rather than just, talk about a narrative to get you there, we like to focus on the data on this channel. So remember, if you guys like the content, definitely subscribe to the channel and you'll see more of this stuff in the future. Turn on your alerts, give the video a thumbs up. And then also remember, we have the premium list if you're looking for exclusive content like the risk dashboard, the trading view indicators, the Telegram alerts channel, weekly videos, and weekly premium reports. Make sure you check out the sale we're having on the premium list in the description below. Check that out before the prices go up. As long as you don't cancel, you can lock in the lower rate. We have a really great community, and you can go check it out. If you guys like the content, remember to subscribe. Let's go for 150,000 subscribers. Thank you guys for tuning in. I'll see you next time. Bye.